Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Emma Gillespie.
I'm Sam Koslowski.
More stress, less friends and fewer babies. These are some of the key trends that have come out of a major longitudinal study. The Household Income and Labour Dynamics in Australia survey, also known as Hilda, released its latest annual statistical report on Friday. The findings show the lasting impacts of the pandemic on all Australians, including young people, whose wellbeing and social lives have taken significant hits since COVID-19, and the findings show are yet to recover.
So Hilda's been capturing trends across a broad cross-section of Australian life since 2001 by conducting annual interviews with the same group of 16,000 Australians and their families. Respondents are asked about things like finances, their social life, and physical and mental health. Now, Hilda's 20th report shows economic factors are having a major influence on our big life decisions, including financial and family planning.
The report's lead author, Dr. Inga Lass, says potential parents are growing more concerned about their financial security and the costs of raising a child, and that pragmatism is outweighing the emotional side of the decision. So to help us understand more about these findings, Inga joins us in today's deep dive. Dr. Inga Lass, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Emma.
We are talking about this latest information, latest data drop from the Hilda survey. I'm interested in particular in the findings on the declining birth rate. We know that Australia's birth rate has been falling in recent years, and there is a section in the report that speaks to fertility intentions. Firstly, what does that mean, and what have we learned about fertility intentions from the latest survey?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So official statistics tell us how many children people actually have. And in the Hilda survey, we're asking people how many children they would like to have. So that is what we call fertility intentions. And what we see is that the trend in fertility intention mirrors the actual fertility rate, so that the desired fertility has also gone down over the last 20 years or so. So still having 2 children is what most people would like to have. That's slightly less than half of men and women. But we do see that the prevalence of people who would like 3 or more children has actually declined significantly. And on the other hand, we now have a greater share of people who would just like 1 child or no children at all. So these 2 groups together now make up around 1/4 of men and women.
What are the different factors impacting people's decision on whether to have a child or not? Is cost of living one of them?
Yeah, there's actually 2 big group of factors that people consider when having children. And one is the emotional side of having children, the emotional benefits, like having someone to love. And the other one is costs and concerns and challenges associated with having children. And we do see that these 2 factors go in quite opposite directions over time when we ask potential parents about how important they think they are. We see that the emotional benefits of having children, they've actually slightly declined in importance over time. But on the other hand, the costs and challenges associated with having children, that's something that has become more and more important in the minds of potential parents. So the major concern seems to be the general cost of having children. And that seems to feed well into the social and economic trends that we have here in Australia. And especially one important one is the rise in the cost of housing, both in terms of renting and in terms of mortgage repayment. And young people who are thinking about starting a family, they will often still be in the phase where they have to save up money for a down payment. And they will have to think about getting a bigger place because families usually cannot do with the 1 or 2 bedroom apartments that are found in many cities. The other factor that we see in the report is that childcare costs, expenses for childcare have increased quite considerably over the time that we've been interviewing people, so over the past 20 years or so. And this is another factor that looms very large in the minds of people because usually both parents would like to be employed. If you don't have grandparents in the background who can take care of the children, you are relying on other types of childcare. And so these costs are often very expensive to parents. And they're also quite expensive in Australia in international comparison.
Young Australians or, people of that age where they're thinking about maybe starting a family, is the feedback that they are having to choose between where they live, how they live, what their housing looks like, and starting a family?
I think it means that if you want cheaper housing, if you want affordable housing, you will have to move towards the outskirts of the city or into regional areas. However, many of the jobs are concentrated in the cities, so that would result often in relatively long commutes. We do see that fathers are among the groups who have the longest commutes overall.
The report also mentions this concept called intensive parenting as a bit of a more contemporary trend in parenting style. What is this term? What does it mean?
Well, that is a norm that parents are expected to spend as much money and time and energy as possible into the development of their children and put their children's needs above everything else. And this really sets the bar quite high for parenting and parenthood. And I would think that it keeps some people from deciding for children to begin with. And the people who do, but they want to be this intensive parent, they will end up having relatively small families because only this is when you can concentrate all your time and money on very few children.
The survey also looks at overall attitudes towards marriage, parenting, relationships. Is there a link between shifts in those attitudes and fertility trends?
We do see that people who have more egalitarian attitudes, they tend to desire smaller families. I haven't really looked much into the causes of that, but I can imagine that if you like to divide work and family equally between the couple, that's still quite challenging. And that becomes also more difficult if you have many children.
How do young Australians feel about marriage? How has that attitude kind of shifted over time?
So we see that people still disagree with the statement that marriage is an outdated institution. So they still see value in it, but it's no longer thought of necessary as a lifetime commitment no matter what. So if the relationship struggles for some reason, then separating has become more acceptable, even if there are children.
The latest findings tell us that the proportion of people in psychological distress has trended upwards since 2013. The prevalence of distress among young people in particular has risen substantially. You've looked into the role of friendships as a significant source of joy in people's lives. What can you tell me about the relationship between friendships and well-being?
Yeah, indeed, friendships are a very important source of social connection. It provides us with emotional support, so we're having somebody to talk to confide in, but it also provides practical support. We have somebody we can call for help. And we do see that there is a connection between people feeling that they don't have many friends and people feeling lonely now and being more prone to poor mental health. On the other hand, the people who feel that they have many friends, they are less likely to feel lonely and less likely to be in poor mental health. So clearly having friends is a protective factor against mental health problems. But on the other hand, the causality can also go the other way, in that people who already have mental health problems will also find it harder to maintain social relationships, especially if they're not in the close family and living with them.
Obviously, this survey has been running over many decades, during which time our daily lives have shifted to incorporate social media. Does social media play a role in our interpersonal connections and friendships?
What we do see is that agreement with the statement, I seem to have a lot of friends, with what we call the perceived number of friends, that has declined considerably over time. And the interesting thing is that the COVID-19 pandemic is one major factor here. We see big declines here, which are easy to explain through lockdowns and social distancing measures. Socializing has definitely taken a huge hit during the pandemic. And what is interesting is that it hasn't really recovered very much afterwards. So apparently people are now used to staying more at home and interacting with people on a digital basis, or maybe not at all. Really, this has started much earlier. So since 2010, we see the perceived number of friends decline. And we think that social media could be one of the driving forces here, and that people, and especially young people, who are also very much affected by this decline in friendships, and that they spend more time online. And it's easier to build connections there, but apparently these connections do not have the same depth as people you meet in real life and interact face to face with on a regular basis.
The Hilda survey looks at, all of these trends and all of this data from 2001 to 2023. What stands out to you through your analysis as being the biggest areas of concern with the most maybe fluctuations towards poor outcomes?
I think this decline in social relationships, be it friendships, but also people having less children, so families becoming smaller, that is quite a concerning trend, because we know that having close connections is important for mental health. And the other thing that I thought was quite concerning across the report was these rising financial pressures that people experience, especially the expenses, for example, for housing, for be it rent or be it mortgage payments, expenses for childcare, which all add up to greater financial expenditures, and which feeds back into these decisions of whether people want to have children or more children, because it is in the end also a question of affordability.
There are obviously, significant concern areas, and sometimes when we go through this data, it can feel a little bit bleak. But what about the more hopeful findings? Is there cause for optimism? What sort of stands out to you as telling a more positive story from the latest data set?
That would be a totally different area, but personally, I do a lot of work on working from home and commuting times. And this one good news that we can get from the report is that commuting times have stayed quite low since the pandemic. They were very much on the rise before, and we had very long commutes, especially in the major cities in Australia, up until 2019. And that all changed with the pandemic, with many people changing into working from home. And our data only reaches until 2023. But what we can see until this point is that because working from home has remained quite prevalent in the labor market, so have commuting times also remained relatively low. And I think that is a good news for people, because we know that long commutes are very bad for people's health as well. They can be a major stressor. And on the other hand, it's also good for infrastructure and traffic congestion and so on.
Is working from home a priority for Australians? Does that tell us anything about their kind of attitudes to work-life balance today?
That's a good question. We do not ask people how much they would like to work from home, or if they would like to work from home, but we do see that a lot of people are using it still on a significant scale. And most of the time they use it as hybrid arrangements. So they spend a few days per week in the office and a few days at home. And I think it does help them fit work in with other personal demands that they have, especially with family demands. That's what my research outside this report also shows, is that working from home helps with combining work and family. It also helps saving commuting times. It provides people with more flexibility to organize their schedules. And so it also increases job satisfaction, at least for women.
What are your predictions for, the next year, 5 years or 10 years of Hilda survey data? Are there any key areas that we should be paying attention to?
Oh, there will be so many interesting topics coming up, probably. You never know what comes up. I think this digital age will mean that we will look a lot into use of social media, for example, but also we have new topics like online bullying that will be in later editions of the report. And who knows what comes up next. But I think also the topic of mental health will be one that will be important, and economic well-being that will be important for the near future as well.
Fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me.